I'm a $10 cowboy. Maybe that's a fact.
This past South by Southwest, you may have seen this poster all over town, on poles, on buildings, even on the ground. It's Texas's own Charley Crockett. The country music star is debuting a new album called The Age of the Ram and also premiering a new documentary film called A Cowboy in London. It's an intimate, raw portrayal of Crockett behind the scenes as he performs 3 sold-out nights in London. So intimate, in fact, much of it was shot by his wife on a camcorder. We spoke with Crockett about the film, about why country music is so beloved even across the pond, and about his journey to being a 20-year overnight success.
I backed into it, you know, as a career of last resort. The situation around me was so bleak. The safest thing to do, in my mind, was to just walk out of town with a backpack and a guitar.
Something that you said at the beginning of the documentary really stood out, that kind of epitomized the theme in a sense, that country music is for people looking for something genuine, for authenticity perhaps. So what does that mean to you, and what is it about country music that feels so authentic that it can even resonate in a place like London?
Well, you know, genres can be difficult for an artist, just because I'm proud of country music, but that doesn't necessarily mean an artist wants to get trapped by its conventions. And so, when you talk about being in London, Texas means something, and it means something everywhere in the world, for better or worse. It's a place that most anyone on earth has heard of. So, I think one thing with country music in the United States is that region matters. It has something to do with it. The other thing is that there's a rural feeling maybe associated with country music that's kind of something you can identify. But that's kind of like the blues, it's about rural people, and more often than not, it's about rural folks maybe having to go to the big city to tell their story under electric lights. And storytelling is not exclusive to the idea of country music per se, but it's central, I think, to the idea of country music is storytelling, and more often than not, personal storytelling.
And I've heard it said by an artist that, interestingly, the more personal a story is, then therefore the more universal the appeal. And it is interesting that according to the UK Country Music Association, that country music is the fastest growing music genre right now. And I especially loved when in the documentary you stepped out in front of these crowds and they were all chanting Charlie in a very distinctive British accent. And then they made that sort of sea shanty of sorts when they were singing.
How much? You gotta throw some cash up on this stage, Hoss. American dollars. Pounds just won't get it done.
And as I mentioned, the theme of authenticity is also underscored, in a sense, by the documentary's production. The rawness, the verite style, the minimal editing, and the intimate moments too, like showing your nerves before a show. And something really interesting to me was how much of the film was shot on a camcorder by your wife, Taylor Grace. That's really special and very different from a lot of the polished, highly stylized music documentaries we see these days. What was the thinking behind that?
Well, part of the reason that this film maybe feels so intimate, or I guess the word would be like verite, almost voyeuristic in a way, is because Jared's one of these filmmakers who has a talent for turn into a fly on the wall. He kind of can blend into the furniture. And then he had an old he had an old camcorder. It was like his dad's camcorder that he used to mess around with in Fort Worth when he was a kid, Burleson, Texas. And he brought it because he knew he was going to be on his own. And he had this idea to hand it to my wife, Taylor, and just said, hey, if you see anything you want to film, I think it would be great. And he didn't have any expectations or know whether she'd do anything with it or not. But Taylor's really, really talented in anything she applies herself to, from songwriting, singing, acting, photography, anything. And I think part of what that is, the intimate comfort that we have as husband and wife and confidants. There's something there, that's what I was telling her in the film. I just saw it again today, kind of reluctantly. It is hard for me to watch that film, just looking at myself, but I said something to the effect of, I always sing it better back here with you, and that
That's
really
so
is
romantic.
true. I sure wish all my records sounded like they do in those moments when she's the one rolling the tape.
There is definitely, as a viewer, a softness to you in the moments that are shot by her, someone you know and you love, as opposed to, this fly-on-the-wall crew. Even if it is still very natural, there is definitely like a nuance, a softness there. You mentioned it's hard for you to watch. Why is it hard for you to watch this film?
Well, so like I say, I met Jared because he wanted me to play a lead role, in a kind of scenario fictional film. And I liked the idea of it. I really did. But I've kind of got this idea that if and when I go to do that, I very much come up in Central Texas in the culture that put us on the map, which there's a lot of people that all on these walls that are part of that, but maybe nobody more than Willie Nelson. And I can think of 4 films of his particularly that have had a big impact on me, and that would be Honeysuckle Rose, Red-Headed Stranger, Barbarossa, and maybe the best one in a way is this film that's maybe the least known. It's called Songwriter from 1984, which is this thinly veiled, kind of like it's like a screwball comedy on the surface. But if you know what you're looking at, it's absolutely a critique and maybe an expose on the entertainment business.
Say hello to the president of Lone Star Music, Mr. Blackie Wilson.
Jared wanted to follow me around and document my career anyway, and he thought that London, the setup being, I hadn't played solo in quite some time, and I was doing a TV show that they filmed there, Jules Holland, and which was a career goal of mine, and there was a lot of press and some in-stores set up around it, and he said, let me come over there with you and just so we have it, let's document it. And when we were leaving and he was looking back at the tape and sending me some scenes, I think we both knew that we had captured something that was very revealing about, what it really takes on the scenic route that I've taken. And when I first saw it, I remember Taylor and I were in a hotel room in New York City. I was actually playing a series of dates there in Manhattan. And he sent us a cut, and we watched it right before bed. And I could barely sleep that night and was really kind of terrified of the film. And I just think that oftentimes music documentaries can really just be kind of an advertising piece, kind of PR campaign. And I think this was something that is maybe intimidated by it as I am. I thought this is let's lay it out there, because there's a lot of debate out there about my background and how I got here, and for better or worse, I think it helps put a lot of that on the map.
And now let's talk about your background. You're right. This is a side of the music business we've, for the most part, never seen and may never get to see. And People have this misconception of your quote unquote sudden rise to fame, but you've been described as a 20-year overnight success. But you also said in the doc that it might have been unfortunate if you had success early. Can you elaborate on that and how your slow burn, to use your word, scenic journey in your career has shaped you as an artist?
Yeah. Well, I've got a line in a song that, talking about, Nashville. They love to lead you by the hand, and they particularly like it when you don't understand. The first time I ever got any kind of deal in the music business, we were performing on subway cars as young, desperate men. We weren't a band or anything. We were just people living hand in mouth on the street in our 20s, panhandling on public transit. And we were doing it so often throughout, 8-10 hours a day. I guess we were destined at some point to gain the attention of industry people. And they were really interested in us because, we were winning over diverse subway cars of hard to reach New Yorkers.
Unfazed by anything in New York.
And we were breaking through, and they saw that, and I remember describing us specifically as, as believable, as the way that the industry people were describing, us as young men, as the believability that they seemed to be most interested in. And strangely, they didn't have, this was, about 15 years ago now. So it was before it really became the way that it is now with social media, with things like TikTok and all of that, and the kind of instantaneous viral moments that can lend towards, authenticity, usually being an example of putting a camera on somebody maybe considered to be less experienced. And so it was right before at least this section of the machine of the industry maybe realized what they had, like what we were doing on the street was probably the most marketable thing that they had, but that was the one thing they didn't see. What they saw was believability and a pop music kind of model that they were trying to kind of force it into. And another word that I remember them describing at the time when they saw that I was going to be maybe not so easy to corral was moldability, So, and I don't regret any of that actually. Though in a way, all these years later, it's the best thing that happened to me, because if you don't know what it is you're selling, you really run the risk of people deciding that for you. You know what I mean?
100%. And it is interesting, this notion of authenticity as currency, which is kind of the antithesis of authenticity.
Yeah, it sure is. Yeah, sure is.
And, in the music business, you are expected to pay your dues to be successful, right? But, after your experiences, like you talked about, your work performing on the streets and your days in New York and around the world, do you think you may have overpaid your dues in a sense?
No two paths are the same or alike. And so I'm not saying that because I've supposedly paid all these dues that I'm more deserving of anything, and I don't want anybody to think that. I just think that what is when you say that, and it's funny because when you're dealing with these modern major label, industry folks, that's exactly what they're saying. Their authenticity's hot. It's all about how authentic you are. And what a lot of that can do is that it can drown out another kind of authenticity, which comes from perseverance, and my street background, my itinerant background, by today's standards is pretty rare. But there was a time when the industry largely looked to itinerant type performers performing on street corners in towns all around America as a kind of go-to place to find, motivated, hardworking talent. An example was I was in Augusta, Georgia, just the other night playing at an auditorium there, and the town is famous for the birthplace of James Brown, and you can ride down the main drag there and see where he started tap dancing on the street as young as I think maybe 5 or 6, and then he would go on to revolutionize American music with his form of it, and that's true of country music too. Is Hank Williams Sr., the rugged individual kind of archetype that all modern country music kind of leads back to, was a young street performer from, playing on the streets of Montgomery, Alabama, shining shoes and selling peanuts and learning how to play guitar from older itinerant street players,
And that's also kind of part of the lore here in Austin, the so-called live music capital of the world. And it is really special to be a part of a city that values, or at least we hope continues to value, music and performing in this way. And during all of this, whether it's the music industry or the current political landscape, you are outspoken. And you sometimes, as a result, experience backlash. But that's a choice that you make. Why is that?
I've always been the way that I am right now. The difference is that there's a lot more people aware of me than there were before. I'm not more outspoken than I was. In fact, you can dig up maybe things that I said when I was a much younger man, and who knows, they might string me up for it. But when it comes to backlash and being outspoken and all that, silence is as much of a political statement as having a stance. I really do think that. And there's a lot of pressure to conform the more you get out there in front of the public. And what I don't ever want to be doing is I don't want to censor myself for what I believe to be right out of fear, of punishment or thinking, only of the money. You start putting the money first, and it's kind of like I would always say. It's like once you get caught up in a scene, it's not about the music anymore. And if you start thinking about the money more than the art, well, that's going to show.
Yeah. That's the Faustian bargain right there.
The what?
The Faustian bargain, the devil's bargain.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like which is as you chase more of the dollar signs, you lose what brought you to the dollar signs in the first place, what people liked about you and made you popular in the first place. And something interesting in the documentary was, you said you made your goals performing at the Houston Rodeo, which was really exciting for us Houstonians, and the Jules Holland Show. You've met these goals. What's next for you on your bucket list?
There's something that's just kind of I've been thinking about recently is I've got a show, I'm doing Stubbs tonight, and I've played indoors there, and Lord knows how much barbecue I've eaten at that restaurant, I used to busk outside of it when I was younger a little bit. This is my first time playing outside amphitheater there. And then after the show, the bus is riding up to Clovis, New Mexico, and there's this old studio there that I'd been trying to get into for years that's been closed down, where they only it's kind of like a tourism museum. And it was the first place that Waylon Jennings ever recorded, and it was where the early Buddy Holly recordings came from with a recording engineer, producer named Norman Petty. And I'm doing those recordings with my friend Shooter Jennings, it's Waylon Jennings' son. And there's all of this debate and question of the identity of what they call kind of, outlaw as a subgenre or a genre. And it's hard to put your finger on it, but I remember Shooter telling me that later in his dad's life and Waylon Jennings' life, his greatest comfort was his David and Goliath victory kind of over the Nashville recording business, if only for a few years, in that key era that kind of defined what the broader business came to kind of call, market, identify as outlaw. And there's a lot of ideas of what outlaw is. It's an attitude, there's a sound, there's an identity to it, and most of that is not, in my opinion, none of that really matters. What it's about is, and to me, is that it's holding on to what you've got, when you're dealing with, like I said, Goliath. And a lot of people are fighting great battles and great struggles against insurmountable odds. But, I always felt that circumstances put me on street corners, and playing on street corners, I developed in a certain way and caught the attention of the business and kind of went right up into the middle of it. And I think that it's always been like this, but there's so much happening in social media and, very divisive politics and a lot of money influencing and trying to get your attention, that like 20 years from now, we'll know what holds up and what doesn't, and I try to keep that in mind, because those were the only goals I had. When I was a kid in South Texas, we had the Rio Grande Valley Stock Show there in Mercedes. I never thought I'd even play that, and I damn sure didn't think I'd play the Houston Rodeo, and like Selena or Beyonce or Waylon or Elvis or any of them. And, I never thought I'd get on a TV show in London. So, but the way that I got there was by, for better or worse, doing it my way. And it's just, that's all I can do, It's a pretty short ride, and, I'm trying to stay sticky and stay up there on the Bronco.
Well, hey, if you keep doing it your way, people will keep following. Well, congratulations on the film. A Cowboy in London has its Texas premiere today, March 18th at South by Southwest. Charley Crockett, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your story.
Pleasure belongs to me.
Thanks so much for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe and leave us a comment below to let us know your thoughts on this video. And don't forget, you can watch full episodes of Austin Insight for free in the PBS app.